Today we are redeeming a certificate that was won during the recent silent auction at the spaghetti dinner in support of our work camp this summer. And that certificate was the right to choose a topic or a title or a text for a sermon. Keith Pearson bid on that certificate, but somebody outbid him. That's the way that goes normally. But the person who outbid him decided that because of his service to the church, he's kind of defied term limits on being a deacon, and is very handy, detail-oriented around here, that in honor of his surpassing service, that he would give the certificate to Keith anyway. And I think it pleased Keith. The very next day, I came into the office and saw him and shook his hand, congratulated him on winning the certificate. And he, right then and there, pulled a quote out of his pocket and gave it to me. It's the quote that's printed at the top of your bulletin today. Patience and diligence like faith remove mountains. A quote by William Penn, the progenitor founder of the modern state of what has become the modern state of Pennsylvania. William Penn was one of those cussedly independent type of people that we talked about not too very long ago. He grew up in England. He separated from the state church of England to become a Quaker when it was illegal to separate from the state church. And for that, he was imprisoned in the Tower of London, indeed in solitary confinement in an unheated cell. He was told to write a retraction of his heresy, and instead he wrote a tome entitled No Cross, No Crown, and also declared, "My prison shall be my grave before I will budge a jot, for I owe my conscience to no mortal man." I think the guy would have fit in pretty well in this congregation, at least on that score. Well, the Lord works in mysterious ways, and because the Quaker faith tradition was growing and was becoming a problem for the king, William Penn came up with a solution and was not only released from prison, but allowed to take his idea and bring it to fruition. It was to allow for a mass migration of these cussedly independent types, mass migration from England to the New World. They were given a very small grant of land, which over time grew into the province of Pennsylvania, later the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, ultimately the state of Pennsylvania. And William Penn was very instrumental in the founding of this country. His democratic principles that he set forth in the Pennsylvania frame of government served as an inspiration for the United States Constitution. He was very much a promoter of uniting all the colonies into one. Not bad for a former inmate. Patience and diligence like faith remove mountains. That is the quote that Keith handed to me from William Penn. And the first text that came to mind was the one that we've selected for our lesson today. It's one that mentions mountains, it's one that mentions faith, and it's one that we will see highly suggests the value of patience and diligence in using the one to move the other. Our text begins, "When they came to the crowd." Who are they? Who are they in our text? Well, this is Jesus, James, John, and Peter. Jesus went up on the mountain and took some disciples with him. Often he went up on the mountain alone to pray. They had to search him out. This time he took James, John, and Peter along with him, where he was transfigured before them. His body was glorified, sort of a preview of coming attractions. And they were granted a glimpse of that on this occasion. Well, it was time to come down from the mountain. Jesus had left his other disciples in charge, as he often did. When he went up on the mountain to pray, he authorized them to continue his ministry for him, healing people of diseases, casting out demons, and so forth. And when they came down from the mountain, they encountered the disciples who had been unable on this occasion to take care of business while he was gone. When they came to the crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. "Lord, have mercy on my son," he said. "He has seizures and is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him." Seizures are a terrible thing to behold. My sister is prone to them, Betsy, and they come unexpectedly. There's no warning, and when they do, she drops. That's just what happens. You can imagine this father. He's got a beloved son. He's got to watch him constantly because he never knows when a seizure is going to take over, and he may fall into the campfire and burn himself, or he may fall into water, even a small stream, and drown because he completely lose all bodily control. His son required constant attention. In those days, destructive influences over which people had no control were referred to as demonic possessions. This was before modern psychiatry, psychology, and medicine, and that's just the framework that they used to understand this situation where people were out of control and in a self-destructive sort of way. So he's come to this man, this father's come to Jesus. He's heard he can heal people, he can cast out demons, and he comes to have his son healed. Jesus is not there. He's told that by the disciples, but the man also knows that they normally take care of business for Jesus when he's gone, and so he asks them to cast out his son's demon. But they can't do it. This time it's not working. So they tell him that they kind of give up themselves and say, you just have to wait till the master returns. Well, Jesus comes back and he hears the story, rolls his eyes at the disciples, and goes to the man, the boy. Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed from that moment. Sort of like that Staples office supply button that you push and says, "That was easy." Well, it was easy for Jesus, not so easy for the disciples. What gives? Then the disciples came to Jesus in private and asked him, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" And he replied, "It is because you have so little faith." Sometimes the disciples have an amazing faith, and they're able to do amazing things like cast out demons and heal diseases. And other times their faith falters, and Jesus has to shore it up again. One time Peter was out on a boat with the disciples on the Sea of Galilee. A storm came up. They were frightened. Jesus comes from the shore walking on the water to them. And he called to Peter. He said, "Come to me on the water." Now that would require a great amount of faith, but Peter possessed it at that moment, and he stepped out of the boat. And don't you know, just like Jesus, he walked on the water until he came to him. But just as he approached Jesus, the wind whipped up some big waves, kind of distracted his attention. His faith began to falter, and he began to sink. Immediately, we read, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" 1 minute, the disciples have great faith and are able to do great things. The next minute, their faith falters. And Jesus decides these are moments to make up object lessons and to shore up their faith. He said, "I tell you the truth. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." Now, I don't get this. Jesus is telling them that the reason they can't cast out this demon and heal this boy is because their faith is too small. Then he tells them a parable that they should have faith as small as a mustard seed. Now, a mustard seed is a very small seed. And to give you an illustration of it, if you take a pencil out of your pew rack and one of those prayer request cards and make a dot on it, the smallest dot you can make. Don't scrawl a big circle on it, just make a dot. That's about the size of a mustard seed. It could come out of a pepper shaker. It's so small. Jesus is telling them that they need a faith as small as a mustard seed, or so it seems. There's another place where he told a parable about a mustard seed, using it as an illustration. He said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all your seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and perch in its branches. Who would have thought that a big tree could come from such an infinitesimally small little seed? I like that picture of the seed on the front of your bulletins. It's not accurate. It's not that big. It's much smaller than that. But I like that picture because it has a mountain in the background and it has a tree off to the side. And that's what can grow from a small mustard seed. Jesus' point is that a mustard seed must have great faith to start off so small and to imagine such a great achievement in the end. So when Jesus is telling his disciples they should have faith as small as a mustard seed, his tongue is in his cheek, because it takes great faith for such a small beginning to have such a great ending, to grow into such a big tree. William Penn, the inmate in solitary confinement, must have had a great faith to believe that the cross he was then bearing would result in such a crowning achievement. I'm sure he never imagined what he would be able to achieve in his life, but he put his faith and his trust in God. Maybe the disciples have had it too easy along life's way. You know, Jesus called them one day, and the next day they're healing people and casting out demons and have a lot of star power behind them. But then, because it's so easy, it tends to be a shallow faith. Maybe they need crosses to bear in order to develop an enduring faith, a great faith, a faith as small as a mustard seeds. And so it is that all the disciples ultimately had their crosses to bear. They were all martyrs for the faith. Peter was crucified upside down because he said, "To die as the master is more than I deserve." It was from this inauspicious beginning that the early church grew. It was such a small thing at the beginning, a single church, the mother church in Jerusalem, and even that church was persecuted terribly, so terribly that it was scattered. But in God's redeeming way, wherever those church members were scattered, new cells of Christianity, worshiping communities, began to develop. And so the church grew. And St. Paul, a former Pharisee and persecutor of the church, became himself the persecuted when he converted. And the more he was persecuted, the more the churches that he planted grew throughout the ancient world, until as it is today, that it is an enduring world religion, started from such small, inconsequential beginnings. God has a history of working that way. In our Old Testament lesson, we learned how God came to choose the chosen people in the beginning. Moses reminded them, "The Lord did not set his affection on you and choose you because you were more numerous than other peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples." In fact, they began with one guy, Father Abraham, the father of the faithful, beyond the age of childbearing, no descendants. And God promised him that he said, "I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore." And Abraham was not called the father of the faithful for nothing. He put his faith and trust in God, and that's exactly what happened. From him came the 12 tribes, and then the nation of Israel. Our problem is trusting this system that God has. He seems to favor the least and the last in the Bible, always beginning very small. We always want to aim for the top, don't we? We like to associate with the big stars. Who doesn't want to get a selfie with a rock star, with a movie star? We love to shake a famous politician's hand and otherwise associate with those at the top, because that is where we want to be. And we think by identifying with them, we're a little bit closer to the top. Unfortunately, our obsession with that keeps us from considering the small and inconsequential, the small beginnings that faith sometimes calls us to make. Imagine if Jesus would have refused to have been born into our world when he found out that he was going to be the son of a humble carpenter from a backwater Nazareth. Imagine if he just said, born in a mangy manger, forget it. That's beneath my dignity. I'm not going to do it. Well, God has this history of operating small, humble, inconsequential beginnings. And from them, great things happen. But our egos won't allow us to be a part of small things. We've seen recently how our egos get us into trouble, cut us off from God's protective and providential care, in fact. And sometimes the only antidote to an ego is a humility to have the great faith in small beginnings. Jesus commended a poor widow he observed her putting 2 small copper coins in the temple treasury, and he said she's given more than all the rest because she has made a greater sacrifice, having less to give than all the rest. She gives all that she has to live on. A mustard seed faith. Jesus values it where he sees it. Those willing to make big sacrifices in small ways. And so it is that Keith, God love you, Keith, is won the day somebody thought that his contributions among us, his sacrifices and service among us, were great enough to win with a smaller bid. Keith is often the first person here at church on Sunday mornings. I know because when he's not, I'm first, and then he's second. And he always comes to my office and knocks on the door, and he asks, are there things that need to be done that are special, a baptism maybe, or we keep the offering in the back of the church today? He has an eye for things that are missing or out of place. And he lets me know I'm an attention deficit guy. I don't focus on that kind of stuff. And we'd have a real mess on a Sunday morning. You just don't know it if he wasn't here pointing out the little details that need to be changed before you all arrive for worship. Sometimes he comes here when the snow is blowing, picks up a shovel, gets the salt out so that you have a clear walkway to walk here at church. Keith's had his obstacles to deal with in life, mountainous ones that would wither a fainter heart. But the guy could smile. He likes a good joke, by the way. If you come in here and you got a funny story, you want to hear a chuckle, tell it to him. We've all got our mountains of obstacles in this life. All of us do. And sometimes they're too high for us to climb on our own. The only way to deal with them is to move them. And we can move them with a mustard seed faith. Faith as small as a mustard seed can take big obstacles and level them out, can enable God to work through us to do great things until at last our lives become like that certificate that Keith bid on. It becomes redeemed, and our lives become redeemed. Please rise.